in the context of doing outbound, we have to actually unlearn certain habits. We have to go from selling like marketers, chasing MQLs and so on, to actually starting to think like humans building a relationship.
Welcome to the Digital Agency Growth Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Englander.
Hey there. So with this episode, I want to update and add to a workshop that we did maybe 6 months ago called The Right Words to the Right People, and talked about what we've been working on since then and what we've seen work in terms of outbound, in terms of making pipeline a lot more reliable. So why does this matter? If you've been in the agency space or in this world for any length of time, you probably already know that keeping the pipeline full and keeping it consistent is one of the hardest parts of the job. You might go heads down on client work or otherwise get caught up and get busy with different things. You stick your head up for air, and then all of a sudden there isn't anything in the pipeline. And that makes it really hard to plan effectively, to grow, to even just choose your clients instead of the other way around, and all these sorts of things. And if you're at this point where maybe your referrals have plateaued, or you have gotten to the point where like you've done these start and stop content experiments or experimented with all sorts of other tactics and none of it's really working, then you're definitely not alone. I think one of the biggest issues with that is not really that any given tactic wouldn't work, but the tactic isn't a good fit for the resources in terms of time and bandwidth and energy that the boutique agency owners or maybe one busy salesperson actually has, especially if that salesperson is being slammed with proposal work and all sorts of stuff that requires like full energy and attention when it arises. So by the end of this episode, you're going to understand how better outbound copy and strategy overall can really help you get the right inputs to get something that's more reliable. That means real conversations with the right people without burning out and without sounding like a spammer or hurting your brand. And as an unhidden agenda, if this sparks your interest and you're like, hey, we need to be doing this or some version of it, there are lots of different flexible ways, or several, I should say, not lots, that we use to help agencies move faster with this. So I'd like to invite you to have a conversation, and you can do that pretty easily by going to salesschema.com. So first, I want to talk about the real opportunity with copy. There's a great quote from Dan Kennedy that goes, "Little hinges swing big doors." A few more positive responses per week can turn into a couple more meetings per week, which can result in an incremental increase to proposals and opportunities, which can mean orders of magnitude more business when we're talking about large deal sizes. And when you actually measure by positive responses and the actual conversations that you're having, then you can really see how these incremental changes can affect your bottom line much more than if you're doing content and this other stuff where there's so many different metrics that often make it disconnected from what you're actually winning. In our training programs, we've gone back and forth with all sorts of different ways to measure outbound and measure all sorts of other new business channels to understand how well they're working. At this point, we are believers that tracking stuff is as much, if not more, about habit formation than it is about actual information intake. So what we really recommend doing is really just keeping a simple LAPS framework. If nothing else, if you don't know that, that stands for leads, appointments, proposals, sales. So if you're tracking that every week, you can really see how incremental changes in copy and improvements there can lead to more leads, appointments, proposals, and sales. And that's what really matters. So why outbound? And if you're like me, you're probably getting tons of spam and tons of stuff that doesn't really work. And you might have even tried outbound in the past and maybe it didn't work for you, or you hired one of the gazillion lead gen companies and they didn't really produce results. So why even go this route? And it's because when it's done right, outbound works and it gives you a high measure of control. You're not waiting around to be found, and you're choosing who you want to work with. This is also important because you might be getting more specialized, like most agencies are. That's the prevailing trend. That's the headwind, is heading more towards specialization. So what are the second and third order effects of that? Well, it probably means that you're being more selective about the clients you're going to work with in terms of industry, in terms of titles, in terms of their problems they experience, and in terms of their culture and temperament. So as your market gets smaller, trying to simply wait for them to find you is often not enough. And it often kind of leaves us in this reactive, hand wringing position. And there's lots of stats that back this up. According to Gartner, 70% of B2B buyers are willing to engage with the seller early on if the outreach is relevant and well targeted. HubSpot's State of Sales says that 56% of B2B buyers who receive cold outreach actually end up booking a meeting if the message feels trustworthy. And Sales Insights Labs found that outbound leads close at a higher rate than inbound for high-ticket B2B services. That's 30% versus 22%. And I love content marketing. I'm doing that literally right now. I love referrals, but outbound is really how you get proactive. If you have a limited total addressable market and limited time and limited resources, then actually getting in front of them with the right message can take you a lot further than many other things. We work with lots of agencies that spend many hours traveling on planes to go to trade shows and conferences. That stuff can be great. I'm not saying to stop doing it, but if you can just basically pause on just one of those events per year, you can put a lot of that time towards actually engaging your market from the comfort of your office and doing it the right way, which I'm going to get into. Also, beyond the immediate thing we're going for, which is leads, appointments, sales, etc., outbound lets you test things way more easily than other channels and way more cheaply, whether that's a new vertical, different messaging, different services or products, different positioning, etc. Another major benefit is that outbound, although there is some platform risk, carries a lot less of it. We've all seen these companies that invest for years in one particular channel and then an algorithm change completely turns over the business. I've experienced this firsthand in previous lives, and I've seen it all over the place. It's not to say that investing in one channel is always a bad idea, but it's something to be conscious of. So that's all the positive, but let's talk about some things that have really sort of put a bad taste in people's mouth about outbound and why the usual playbook is broken for most agencies and B2B service companies. So most agencies are sort of getting the outbound download from A, what's in their spam box, and B, what many, consultants and people that are setting up these systems are saying that you should do. And most of that framework is built on the software or the SaaS industry. So in response, the agency either does zero proactive outreach or they write custom love letters. We had a more recent workshop than the one I'm referencing today, where an agency owner was basically talking about how him and his team might spend 10, 15, 20 minutes researching a prospect, reaching out to them, referencing specific things that they saw, and it would almost always fall on deaf ears. So they, in the last few months, wasted countless hours doing this approach. And that's because the AI and the level of research has gotten so good that most people are just assuming that that was a mass outreach, even though this agency was putting in tons of time. There's just no way to tell anymore when you're looking at publicly available data, right? So what we don't want to do is just waste our time writing these custom love letters. We need a certain amount of automation and scale and leverage to actually make this sustainable and to have it be running in the background when we're doing other stuff that needs to be done in the agency or our lives. But on the other hand, we don't want to go full bore into the SaaS model, which is a very different product, right? These are products that are transactional. They're paying, 30, 50, $100 a month. You get to see the product immediately and invest in it versus the benefits of what you provide are often not realized until weeks, months, or sometimes even years after somebody has worked with the agency. So how do we balance these sort of things and how do we actually make outbound work? The first thing is we have to acknowledge what many have called the trust recession. And that's acknowledging that the thing we are optimizing for is no longer lack of information or awareness or just putting what we do in front of more clients. That's not going to really work until they are absolutely ready to buy and they're in a proposal situation and so on. And with any approach like this, whether it's outbound, inbound content, trade shows, etc., we are at a higher point in the funnel. We're further up the funnel and we need to be getting these relationships and these conversations a different way. So the trust recession is here because there is more skepticism, there is, more competition for services, but also for attention. That's the bigger issue. And that's increasing a lot because of AI and because of all the, perfectly tailored messages that we're getting all the time. So in the context of doing outbound, we have to actually unlearn certain habits. We have to go from selling like marketers, chasing MQLs and so on, to actually starting to think like humans building a relationship. And this is something that we've undergirded, in our manifesto, which we call Relationship Sales at Scale. It's a book, by the way. So the idea is you're not looking to convince somebody to buy on that first touch. You're simply looking to de-risk a conversation and thus a relationship. And you're becoming the person that they remember when they are ready. And I'm going to talk about techniques and tactics that we've seen work and how to leverage these things very shortly. But if we just jumped right into that, the issue is there wouldn't be the right building blocks, right? It'd like be missing a column to hold up the building kind of situation. And the foundation of everything is really understanding your total addressable market and getting the data right before you even begin. So if you're listening to this and you're like, yeah, we got that down, great, but we've yet to work with an agency that doesn't need to get that image sharper at least 20% in order to make this work. And many agencies are all over the place and have like a half dozen verticals they've worked with to provide a number of different services. So if that's you, there's a few words of wisdom and lessons that we've learned that will make that clarity building process a lot easier. The first is don't start with more than 3 ideal client profiles. That might be, like fintech growth companies. It might be growth stage CPG. It might be institutional banks. But an important thing is not having too many of them. That's the first. And then the second is thinking about the ICP based on how those people think of themselves. So if nothing else, if you sent the same message to that ICP and you said, hey, we work with, growth stage fintech, everybody there should be like, great, I work for a growth stage fintech company. But if you're like, we work with financials and you're thinking about institutional banks alongside growth stage fintech, they're probably going to be like, well, that's a completely different situation. So a good rule of thumb is if you met one of the people you're reaching out to at a cocktail party, what would they say they do? Or rather, what kind of company would they say in that, like, I work for an X company in that actual conversation? And that's a good way to think about bucketing your ICPs. Later, as we get more advanced, it's not that we're not going to segment more. You might have different segments within the ICP for this title or this situation or that situation. But that's the starting point. One way to think about personalization is that segmentation and personalization are basically the same thing. If we segment, then we can easily personalize. That's another thing to keep in mind. This might sound tactical. It may sound like it's just a piece of the puzzle, but it's a very big piece because a lot of the time, the agencies that we work with are thinking more about themselves than they are their prospects. And this resonates everywhere, or this comes out of every single part of the company. You go on the website and it's like, here are all of our amazing case studies. Here's all the great work we've done, but there's very little second person focused copy. And there isn't a lot that says, here is the problem that we solve. It's just us, us, us. So that, doing that everywhere and fixing that issue all over the place is bigger than what we're going to cover right now. But for outbound, we want to think about this in terms of how we define who it is that we're actually going after. Great. So we talked about defining the market. We talked about why outbound is worth considering, if not running with. And you might be wondering, okay, what do we actually say to these people to get the meeting? Again, back to the idea that the scarce resource is not just awareness, it's actually trust. So how do we build trust with the copy? There's a million tactics and case studies we could get into, but what we found is that really making these your own is going to make them a lot more powerful. So the way we like to think about it is the 6 ingredients we like to focus on in some degree in every campaign. There's some campaigns that have more of one than the other. There's some where it's just a little sprinkling, but these are the sort of approaches and forces that we've seen really de-risk conversations and build relationships. The first is tribe-based kinship. So this is the idea that when you reach out to somebody, they just get this feeling that, okay, this person is in my world. They're like, whether I want to talk to them right now, they're in the right place. This we like to achieve often with commonalities, right? So this can happen through, hey, I'm literally in your backyard. I'm going to the same trade show. We've worked with clients that you probably know, or we have people in common that we know. So that's the first thing. Tied very closely to that, the second ingredient is deep understanding. This often comes with being able to kind of talk the talk and walk the walk, to speak the language, often the secret language that only the insiders in that particular industry really know. There's a lot of examples of this, and some of it's very subtle, but those subtleties matter. I'll give you an example from our world. Like when we're selling to agencies and we're doing outbound, we rarely say the word lead. We sometimes don't even like to say the word sales. We use terms like new business, sometimes business development. We can say prospects, proposals, opportunities. But if we say the word lead, we're now lumped in with the gazillion undifferentiated lead gen companies. And right now, we do training and implementation after our pivot. But even before that, we avoided those sorts of words. When we have worked with agencies targeting rehab centers, they're not talking about closing deals. If somebody said that, they would instantly be pegged as a horrible fit. They're using the words like intakes, right? Or admits, rather, I should say. In the legal field, they're talking about cases. And those are just very surface level examples. This can go very deep. So if you're thinking about outbound and you're like, hey, like this market over here is growing, but you don't know it very well, it's going to be an uphill battle to understand that market well enough to write good copy for it, even if that copy is just a few lines, because the devil's in the details with it. So with that in mind, if you're thinking about ICPs, pick the one or start with the one that you know best. If you want to do an exploratory mission in parallel, great, but focus on the one that you know, because deep understanding is the thing that's really going to have people get this reaction that's like, I never respond to unsolicited outreach. There was something different about your approach, and I'm ready to talk. That's like 80% of the responses we get. It's not from people that just take sales calls all day. It's people that are getting a different reaction to the one they normally get. Cool. So that's ingredient 2. Ingredient 3 is show, don't tell. We've all gotten the outbound message, the sales pitch that's like bragging. It's basically just like a paragraph or more of somebody talking about all their accolades. We've helped this brand increase ROAS from X to Y%. We've made a gazillion dollars and so on. Subtlety is going to be a big theme here, especially when we're talking about complex B2B sales. So for show, don't tell, what that often means is pointing to stuff that is inarguable. Like, we've been in business for 20 years and we've worked with more than 200 CPG organizations, right? Pointing to stuff that people can't, they might not have a fit, they might not be ready to talk, but they can't really argue with your claims, versus just pointing to something that's clearly just bragging. And this doesn't just have to be through like track record or pointing out hundreds of clients. Maybe you're a newer agency, or maybe you're newer to a particular vertical. There's other authority builders. Like in our outreach, I talk about, hey, also, by the way, I host the Digital Agency Growth Podcast. We're going strong for now nearly 300 episodes over several years. That is sort of saying like, hey, like I'm actually part of this world. I'm showing you an asset that I have built. I'm not just like dipping my toe in the water of this industry. That sort of thing is important. So that's ingredient 3. Ingredient 4 is timeliness. So timeliness is one of the ones that transcends outbound. It goes everywhere in marketing, like the right message at the right time. So some of this can happen through different triggers, which we may talk about soon. But even if it's not as overt as like, hey, you must be in market because I saw this thing you're doing over here, even just tying something to the calendar. This could be seasonality. It could be things going on in the industry that are very current. It could mean conferences and trade shows that are, specific to your area that you might be attending, or even if you're just thinking about attending them, it ties them to the calendar. It could be an event that you're hosting or an event that you're doing that you want to bring people to. But basically, if you can think about what's actually going on right now, this now connects to the other. So all these are obviously tied together, but understanding current events and timeliness makes you more of somebody that exists in their tribe, right? So that's the fourth one. The fifth one also ties to the grander, marketing ecosystem, let's say, and that's pattern interrupts. So pattern interrupts are funny because if you think about a pattern interrupt, you might be thinking about like the Seth Godin purple cow concept. What's something really wild and crazy that we can do that nobody else is doing? So a lot of the times when people think about this with Outbound, they go kind of cute. They go like a little bit off the reservation and they say things like, "Hey, did you just not respond to me because you're getting chased by a wolf or an alligator?" And it's like, it's kind of goofy. The other issue with that is this probably could be a whole other concept, but I'll just breeze over for now. It establishes a vertical relationship versus a horizontal relationship. What do I mean by that? I mean that if in a vertical relationship, you're either putting yourself above or often below somebody else by saying like, "Hey, like I'm being, self-effacing because you didn't get back to me. It must be some other reason," but you're also implying like you just don't want to talk to me. And then you could also do this the other way, which we've seen, which is like, "We're so awesome. Hey, we have one more spot open," and so on. And maybe we have limited availability to talk to you. That all has its time and place. I'm not saying that scarcity and exclusivity isn't a lever that you can pull, but it doesn't work for Outbound when you're dealing with a skeptical market. So the response to this is we want to be on a horizontal plane with everybody that we reach out to. You're busy and I'm busy is the vibe. We are on the same level. I'm not going to disrespect you, and I'm also not going to put myself below you and beg for a meeting. The subject lines are not some weird like marketing copy. It's not something cute. It's something specific to what you're actually saying. Again, back to like, if you wouldn't send it to somebody that you've met in person, don't send it to somebody that you don't know. And I mean that in terms of tone and in terms of approach. An example of a pattern interrupt that I bring up a lot is that we worked with an agency that was doing a hometown campaign. So we found a cluster of several hundred prospects from this client's home area. And we said, "Hey, I'm, originally from this part of town. I've lived in this other place for this many years." So just spending a line on that. And that makes it, a lot different than the usual, like, "I was perusing LinkedIn and I noticed this." It's just a little bit different, right? But it's using the same basic data point. It's just kind of thinking of it in a different way. And that client went on to get about a dozen meetings and happened to close a six-figure deal from that one campaign. So that's what we're thinking about in terms of pattern interrupts. And then the last ingredient is de-risking the ask, which is usually a request for a conversation. So we want to make it safe to say yes. This is making it low pressure. This is looking to give value. Often the phrasing that we're using is, I don't know if the timing's right for this, but I would like to be a future resource. Because again, you might be thinking this and you're like, "I only want to talk to people that are ready to buy right now." The issue with that is, for one, it's a very small percentage of the market. Like some people will say 3%, whether it's 1% or 5%. It's not that many people. And then when we're talking about a sale where trust is really important, like a complex sale, those people that are in market right now are probably going to do business with the agency that they know, like, and trust, that they have built a relationship with weeks, months, or even years prior. So the answer to this is get selective about who you want to work with, and then basically develop a cadence or a drumbeat of these net new relationships or conversations every single week, right? And then what's going to happen with that is, yes, you are going to get lucky and a certain small percentage will be in market, but we don't want to exclude everybody else as well. So that's how we're thinking about it, and those are the 6 ingredients. So during the workshop, somebody asked a really good question, which is, how do I scale personalization without writing one-to-one emails? And how do I scale this commonality-based approach? Here's the answer. You don't scale just rote personalization. You can, but it's probably not going to work because that's what everyone else is doing. Just regurgitating publicly available data back at people is falling on deaf ears. You can see it coming from a mile away, and it doesn't work very well. What we really want to do is scale relevance, right? And you're going to scale that overall from this approach and this mindset, while each individual campaign may not scale infinitely. So you're thinking about grouping your prospects by common traits and commonalities. That could be location, the role, the past company, the industry. And then in tandem with that, you can also be looking at triggers, and you can combine these things like Lego pieces or just do one at a time. So Common triggers are, somebody's hiring for a particular role, they're new to their role, and then once you get more sophisticated, you could be looking at intent data. So that's the new thing that we're adapting into our system, is basically like stacking these like Lego blocks so that you're both leveraging a commonality, like, hey, we're in the same place and we've worked with your specific industry. And also I saw that you might be needing this kind of help because of this thing. So that's a situation where somebody's much more likely to take the call. And even if they don't take the call, they're not hitting the spam button and they're not putting you in the deliverability dungeon as much. And that's really what we're going for. Another question that came up in the workshop is, what channel should I be focusing on with Outbound? I'll talk about personal experience a little bit. So for years, we would try to sort of like both first build for people, run in a lead gen context, multi-channel, omni-channel systems. And then later we started teaching people how to do it. What we've sort of decided is that trying the mental bandwidth that goes into managing, hey, first they get a LinkedIn message, then they get an email, then we're going to cold call them, then we're going to send them a direct mail, is really high. It's a lot to manage. And the other thing is, what we found from experience is it doesn't always produce more results, right? If somebody doesn't want to talk and they get a message over email, them getting another message over LinkedIn isn't necessarily going to close the deal. I think that if you have a ginormous market, this has some exceptions to it. But for most of us in B2B services in the agency world, our total addressable markets are not that big. And what we've sort of found, and this definitely resonates with me, from personal experience, is that different people respond better or worse over different channels. So really what we like to do is just hit up everybody in one, then the other, and then the next one, and then progress up the line in terms of the investment of the channel and the complexity. So for example, direct mail is more complicated and more expensive and riskier if you get it wrong than the other. So often we're either just not touching it at all, or we're doing it as like a black belt play later on down the line. So typically, we're starting with LinkedIn, and that involves our referral engine and looking at who's connected to who and reaching out there. You can do more, LinkedIn automation. LinkedIn's often easier to get started with. From there, as we're doing things with LinkedIn, that also gives us the opportunity to start building the email infrastructure in the background, start warming up domains, getting deliverability good, getting everything kind of ramped up and built while we're doing things with LinkedIn. Then we can go on to contacting those people over email, several months later. And then later, often we're not getting to this, but if people wanted to, you could get into cold calling and direct mail, although cold calling has its challenges when we're talking about remote work and white collar and so on. So that's the way we're thinking about the different channels and approaching outbound. Also, just talking about some good first principles things to think of before you get started with any particular software tactic or anything like that. First, like we talked about, we want to get clarity on who we're selling to, the problem we're solving, that sort of basic stuff that will make everything else easier. Right. It's kind of like if you were going to go wander around in the Amazon rainforest, you'd probably want to have like the map and the GPS figured out. It's before you just go off and buy, backpacks and shovels or whatever. So, the metaphors don't always hit, but you got to go for them anyway, right? You got to swing. So that's the first thing. The second thing is thinking about the who question, like really who's going to be doing the work and the foundation for not just who's going to launch a campaign and scrape up a few leads and close a couple of deals, but really like how are you going to build the sustainable system that adds equity value, that is running no matter how busy you get, so that you don't have this situation where you come up for air and there's nothing in the pipeline. Like we want to think about this in terms of systems, and systems live with the people question answered first. So there's a few different ways to think about this, and there's not one right answer, but for most of our clients, there's one owner that is sort of balancing sales with a million other things. So the way to think about this is the plan isn't to get sales off your plate or even to get outbound or marketing or internal marketing off your plate. What we've seen work the best is to have one owner devote 80% or more of his or her time on net new business, right? So that often means investing in getting ops and client work off of this person's plate. One of the biggest mistakes that I've made before, we've seen countless clients make, is hiring the driver before you have the car. So really, it may take at least a year. It may take multiple years to get the car to a place where you have more leads than you need to sustain a new driver, right? So if that's you, if you are an owner and you're looking to ramp up an outbound program, the first thing is making time for it and then time blocking in terms of the tasks involved. Too often, it's sort of like when people say the word work. Like the word work can mean like scrubbing your bathroom or it could be writing the next American novel. I've always thought that we don't have enough words in the English language to represent different types of work. So when you say, I worked all weekend, people like kind of like, oh, it's too bad, you should get out. It's like, well, what kind of work was it? It sort of matters. The same thing applies to the word sales, right? Like if you're thinking about sales, like it could be you literally on a call. It could mean you setting up a platform like Clay or Smart Lead, which is a different skill set and different sort of work. So what we recommend doing is time blocking based on that so that you're not paying all these task switching costs. So you might have availability open for sales calls, right, where you need your energy and you need to stay focused on interacting with other people. And then you might have your nerd time where you go heads down, building lists, troubleshooting software, getting the infrastructure of Outbound built. And those are completely different tasks, and you shouldn't be jumping between them very well. So with that in mind, you might be thinking, okay, I have some help. Like I have somebody that can shave off a few hours per week to this, or I even have a new business person, and so on. So what's important is that if you have multiple people, you don't have too many layers of approval. Like what you want is somebody that can run with stuff, that can come up with campaigns without having to get somebody else to look at every single word of copy that ever gets sent, because then it's really hard to make these sorts of adjustments. So I think that if you have that person to help you, that's great, but you should know what's going on, kind of the trust but verify sort of thing, but also give them a good degree of autonomy. And if you can't give them that autonomy or you don't trust them enough to be writing copy in your words, then you may have to be more involved in this, or you may not be ready to delegate it all quite yet. So that's the first thing. The second thing is if you have that new business person and the outbound is going to be coming from them, a lot of the times what we've seen is they're like, well, I should be doing all of this myself. On the other hand, like that person still needs help. They still need a good amount of support so that they can be spending 80-90% of their time just talking to prospects and doing deeper funnel work, whether that's proposals or follow-ups, one-to-one follow-ups, etc. So you can get somebody that can help them build this infrastructure. That's ideal. Too often we've seen agencies hire this new business role and just send the person out into the cold. I think there was a time when there really was like this dialing for dollars type salesperson that could just go out and hunt and do everything themselves. Now, because of this trust recession and because of how much it takes to get a conversation, I think those days are sort of waning, right? And it really takes a bit of a village. That doesn't mean that salesperson should just be sitting on their hands. Like they should be proactive, but they should be proactive with mostly the people that they've already talked to and qualified, as opposed to having to bear the full weight of getting demand and getting people to reach out to the agency on the inbound side, or in our case, getting people to agree to talk through an outbound process. So with that, to summarize really quick, the most important starting place is going to be getting clarity on who you're going after, who's running this, building trust through those 6 ingredients, no matter what particular tactic or campaign you're running. So that's going to be tribe-based kinship, number 1. Number 2, deep understanding. Number 3, show, don't tell. Number 4, timeliness. Number 5, pattern interrupts. Number 6, de-risking the ask, which is usually a call. Again, we want to optimize for building trust, not just awareness, not just information. And it all starts with the right words to the right people. So if you want help putting this into place, including mapping your market, crafting messaging, building deal flow, building the list, setting up the infrastructure, we should definitely talk. Within the last year here at Sales Schema, we've adapted different models that give our clients a lot more flexibility. So regardless of your situation, chances are there's a way that we can help you actually implement this based on the time and resources that you have. So if you'd like to learn more and request a consultation with us, all you need to do is go to saleschema.com. Thanks for joining. Hope this was useful and look forward to catching you on the next episode.